The Phala Phala saga is set to be heard in the Constitutional Court this morning. The economic freedom fighters filed an application to challenge the National Assembly's decision to not adopt the independent panel report on the matter. The NPA declined to prosecute President Cyril Ramaphosa in connection with the alleged theft of dollars from his farm in 2020. The African Transformation Movement are the second applicants in the matter. The ATM president, Vuyo Zungula, now joins us to have this conversation ahead of that hearing in the Apex Court. Vuyo, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. How do you feel this morning, considering that this matter is now again before the Constitutional Court, and also taking into consideration that you've had other law enforcement agencies and institutions of the state that have already cleared the president?
Aldrin, I think we need to remind the viewers that Parliament or the National Assembly elects the president, and the president is accountable to the National Assembly. In the context of the Phala Phala scandal, we had an independent panel report which is comprised of which was drafted by an independent panel which was led by a reputable former Chief Justice. Outside of the political consideration, they were only looking at the basis of the law. They came with a recommendation that stated that there's prima facie evidence of a serious violation to the Constitution, serious misconduct. Therefore, in that regard, Parliament, in our view, made an unlawful decision when it decided not to further investigate the matter. In December 2022, when there was a vote in the National Assembly, the vote was whether we are going to establish a committee that will investigate or inquire those allegations against the president, or we are not going to establish a committee. In our view, Parliament was wrong to say we are not going to investigate, because an investigation can lead to two possible outcomes. On one side, it can clear the president. On the other side, it can reach a guilt verdict. Now, it can't be that Parliament is going to refuse to investigate, because Section 42(3) of the Constitution is very clear to say the work of the National Assembly is to scrutinize the actions of the executive. Now, if there's a report that is saying there's something worth scrutinizing, and then Parliament is saying we're not going to scrutinize, that is a violation of the Constitution.
Yeah. But here's the other point that has been stressed by the ANC as well, is that the matter was put before Parliament, and there was a vote that took place, and the majority then decided that actually there is no case for the president to answer to, and therefore that the report should be struck off. The president also in his papers is arguing that the panel misapplied itself in terms of the terms of reference that it has and how far it can go in determining evidence. And they are arguing not information, but evidence.
That report, Aldrin, it is still a legally binding and valid report. If the president really believed in what he was saying, he would have gone to court on a separate issue. You'll recall that he even tried going to the Constitutional Court with the sole objective of seeking to overturn that report, but he failed. He could not get an audience by the Constitutional Court. But as things stand now, that report is legally binding. Our view is that outside of that report being overturned and being set aside, there is no justification for a person to say that report was flawed, because only a court of law can overturn that report, not the opinions of members of Parliament. Secondly, the majority in Parliament, or the members of Parliament, must operate and conduct themselves in a manner that is consistent to the Constitution. Even if they have a majority, they need to exercise that majority in line with what the Constitution requires. It cannot be that they are going to take a decision that is against the Constitution, but because they've got a majority, then it seems as if it's normal. That is why we approach the courts just to set aside that decision as a decision that was unlawful, that was irrational, because in our view, yes, they had the majority, but the majority took an unlawful decision. That is the contention today.
Yeah. You say only a court can overturn that report. Where do you take that from? Because the argument, once again, even from the National Assembly, is that in terms of the rules which have been adopted by members of parliament, which would include the EFF at the time, is that a panel would be set up. After the panel has been set up, there will be an investigation, whatever form that investigation takes up in terms of a Section 89 panel. And then the very same MPs who voted on the establishment of that panel will then be voting on the report. That is according to the rules of parliament.
Yes, indeed. When they vote on the report, they need to vote rationally. They cannot be voting, taking into account political party considerations. That is why even on the day, there was members from the majority party who felt that that report stood and it needed to be tested via an impeachment inquiry. The National Assembly decision, or what was transpiring in Parliament December 2022, it was not to review the report, because the reviewal of the report, it is something that can only be done by court of law, because even the argument to say it is legally flawed, the evidence or information, those are legal terms which requires legal experts in the form of the court to overturn. But what was before Parliament on the day was whether are we going to adopt this report that will lead into the formation of a committee to further investigate the matter or not. You'll recall that even in the impeachment process of Advocate Mkhwebane, there was a report that was done which found that there was prima facie evidence of wrongdoing, which led that Parliament had to vote. So the voting part of Parliament is a process. However, it is a process that needs to be applied rationally. It cannot be that majority is going to abuse its, they are going to abuse its power simply because they've got the numbers and they are going to act in a manner that is inconsistent with the Constitution.
Well, do you agree with the EFF that that particular rule that allows Parliament to vote on a report should be done away with because it is unconstitutional?
Like we've seen now, whereby there is a report from a reputable Chief Justice that clearly states that there's prima facie evidence, there's a prima facie case of serious wrongdoing. However, you have a case whereby now members of Parliament, they vote according to their political narrow party interest instead of doing what is expected by members of Parliament, which is to hold the executive accountable. Therefore, that rule opens up a majority power abuse, because the bone of contention here is how the majority on the day, the majority party abuses majority in order to shut down any investigation, because any rational person, Aldrin, can agree that if there is a report done by independent panel, and they did not, Chief Justice Ngobo did not just wake up and decide to draft that report. It was Parliament via the Speaker's office, in accordance to the rule, that actually invited those particular people who served on the independent panel. They were doing work as mandated by Parliament. And then when they come with a recommendation to say there's wrongdoing, it cannot be that the very same Parliament is going to vote against its own processes, because that report is a result of the very same process, or is a result of the process of Parliament.
Yeah, and for me, what's interesting as well is that while the President is arguing in his papers that the panel misapplied itself in terms of how it's done the investigation, the information versus sufficient information or sufficient evidence versus information, and whether prima facie evidence does equate to sufficient evidence, is that Parliament in its papers doesn't express itself at all on that particular element. And I wonder what that means. Does it mean that Parliament is satisfied with the work that has been done by the panel? The only issue is that it then put the report before the House as per the rules, and then it was the House that decided by majority to vote off that report.
You'll recall, Aldrin, that even now, Parliament is still largely influenced by the ANC. And the ANC will always protect their own leaders at the expense of the principle and good governance principles of our that are required to move the country forward. So what we see here, even with Parliament, we have a Parliament that is seemingly confused because on one side, they cannot then say their own rules, their own processes are incorrect, but at the same time, say those rules are actually correct. So what we're dealing with here, we're dealing with a parliament that is not fulfilling its constitutional mandate. Rather, it is acting in a manner that is only taking into account the political party considerations. And we need to remind the people, there is previous court judgments which actually guided members of parliament to say, once you are a member of parliament, we need to act in a manner that is consistent with the constitution, putting the country first ahead of the interests of the party. So the issue now is having a parliament as per that particular vote in December that acted in a manner that was not thinking about the country, but was rather thinking about their own political party.
Yeah, finally, the argument that has been put forward by the president as well as the ANC is that this essentially is a review application. The EFF is arguing that actually, no, we're seeking a declaratory order. But what would you want to see coming out of this particular matter? What does it look like when the Constitutional Court finally takes its decision?
Look, today the focus should be on the decision of Parliament. The reviewal of that report, it is a separate process in which Mr. Ramaphosa went to the Constitutional Court and he failed. So what we're hoping to achieve today is to show the court that the Parliament or the National Assembly made an irrational and unlawful decision by voting against holding an inquiry to investigate whether there is wrongdoing on the side of the president. So that is what we're looking at, whether in December 2022, when the National Assembly voted not to adopt that report, did it act in a manner that is consistent with the Constitution, or Parliament betrayed its constitutional mandate by blocking any form of scrutiny over the president?
Thank you so much for your time.